And now to our program. Thank you, Gail. As Time magazine editors and authors Nancy Gibbs and Michael Duffy will tell you, there is no advice, there is no handbook that tells you how to be the President of the United States of America. Their New York Times bestseller, The President's Club, reveals that it makes little difference how much they have fought on their way to the White House. Once they have arrived, they are bound by experience, duty, ambition, and scar tissue. Nancy Gibbs is the deputy managing editor of Time magazine. Chicago Tribune has named her one of the top 10 best magazine writers in the country. Nancy is the author of more than 150 Time magazine covers. Michael Duffy is a Time magazine executive editor and directs the coverage of presidents, politics, and national affairs for the magazine. He joined Time in 1985 as a Pentagon correspondent and covers Congress, the White House, national politics, and national security. The President's Club reveals that the sheer experience of sitting in the Oval Office binds these men far more closely than politics or party divide them. And now, to take us inside the world of the most exclusive fraternity, please welcome Nancy Gibbs and Michael Duffy.
That was kind of a do-si-do there. Thank you. Congratulations, Sarah, on your swan song, your year in office, I think. And congratulations, Gail. Fabulous. I start simply by virtue of a flip of the coin today, but we're thrilled in particular to be here in Palm Beach, which is, some of you may already know, is a President's Club historic, what do you call it?
Redoubt.
Redoubt, yes. It's there's specific and secret incidents in this book that take place here. We're going to talk about in a minute. And of course, the Foreign Club was founded in its inaugural speech by a member of the President's Club back in 1976. Normally, when we talk about presidents, we talk about them one at a time. We think about them one at a time. We read about them one at a time. That's how we elect them. That's how we unelect them. Nancy and I wanted to try something different in this book because we know that relationships matter. And we wanted to crawl inside a different kind of conversation between presidents, one that isn't with us, one that isn't one at a time, and one that is between them. Uh-oh, right from the start, I've goofed up. Can we advance it one screen to the picture of the three men?
Or not.
One more.
Try hitting the green
One
one
more.
again.
Just... No. It's a great PowerPoint, really. We can do this without pictures.
We can, but it's not as much fun.
There we go. Okay, this is what we're talking about. This is a very different conversation. This is not how we think about our presidents. They are not facing us. They are not even talking to us. They are talking to each other. And what a trio that is. What we wanted to do is to understand the relationship between the presidents, to find out what that told us about the men we know as individuals, about the office they hold, and about our politics that at the moment aren't working very well.
And that story starts with probably the most unlikely imaginable pair of presidents. It starts when Harry Truman has suddenly found himself in office in the spring of 1945 and secretly sends a letter to the ultimate pariah of American politics, still at that time, Herbert Hoover, who had not stepped foot in the White House since he was driven out with his motorcades pelted with rotten fruit back in 1933. Truman does not care. He doesn't care that Hoover's a Republican. He doesn't care that he is an outcast, an exile. He doesn't care that he was, as Truman said, to the right of Louis XIV. What he cared about was that Herbert Hoover knew more than anyone alive about feeding hungry people. It's what he had done after World War I, and it was what Truman needed him to help him do at a moment when as many as 100 million Europeans were at risk of starving in the aftermath of the Second World War. Truman invites him back, says, "Can you come in and talk to me? We have this enormous problem to solve." They're very suspicious of each other. Neither of them thinks anything is likely to really come of this. Within the next year, Truman had given Hoover a plane, a staff, sent him 55,000 miles around the world, 22 countries. He met with 30 prime ministers and 7 kings and the Pope, moving food from countries that had it to countries that needed it. And it was the start of what became a beautiful friendship, to the point that on the day that Eisenhower is inaugurated president in 1933, Hoover goes over, 53, Hoover goes over to greet Truman on the platform and says, "I think we should form a former president's club." This is the language they use. We thought we were making this up, and then we found the more we did, the more real this is. Truman's great. You be the president, I'll be the secretary. In the years that followed, Eisenhower granted them, through an act of Congress, pensions and mailing rights and office space. Lyndon Johnson gave them Secret Service protection, the use of White House planes and helicopters, and even a movie projectionist, so that if they were being treated at Walter Reed, they could rent movies from the White House Film Library. But then, Johnson, souvenirs, President's Club souvenirs. He gives Eisenhower a pair of cufflinks with the presidential seal on it. And he says, "You know, you and Harry Truman are really the only two who can legitimately wear these." He says, "You notice it doesn't say Democrat or Republican on them." But then it was Richard Nixon who really gave the club its, shall we say, most physical manifestation.
You know, every club needs a clubhouse. I'm sure the Forum Club, this is the Forum Club's clubhouse. But Richard Nixon got so tired in 1969 of Lyndon Johnson calling from Texas saying, "I want a plane, I want a car, I want a hotel, I want a place to work," when he came to Washington, that Nixon finally turned to a young military aide named Brent Scowcroft and said, "Just find him someplace." And which is how, over a short period of time later, in 1969, they created the Presidential Clubhouse, a house on Lafayette Square that has 2 dining rooms, 2 bedrooms, one of which has a standalone bathtub in it. And when I was in it 3 weeks ago, has a thread count on those bedrooms that must be a gajillion. This is the master bedroom in the President's Clubhouse on Lafayette Square. And you'll notice from the bedspread that if they ever are staying there and they wake up in the morning and they're not quite sure what their old job was, they can just look down toward their toes and see. And it's, the clubhouse still lives 45 years later. Nearly all the presidents have stayed there, though George W. Bush, after hearing his mother complain about what a dump it was, had it very nicely renovated.
Well, we found a number of things surprised us. As much as Michael and I have been writing about covering presidents as journalists for many years, we kept on finding that what was happening off stage was much more interesting than what happened on stage. And that it was almost a truth all the way through that the more different 2 presidents were in party and outlook and ideology and generation, the closer they were, or the more they were prepared to help one another in often extraordinary ways. So this photograph was taken just months into Kennedy's presidency, the first time he ever went to Camp David. And many of you recognize it because this was a photograph that Kennedy very much needed to have taken. It was taken 5 days after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy has come under attack from all over the world, and he needs to be seen consulting with the revered predecessor who had warned him of all the things that can go wrong in presidential decision-making if you're not careful. And so this is the moment where Eisenhower pretty much literally takes Kennedy to the woodshed. And they talk about how the decision had been made, how it had gone wrong, and Kennedy says, you know, no one knows how tough this job is until they've been in it a few months. And Eisenhower says, you know, forgive me, Mr. President, I tried to warn you a few months ago. But the extraordinary thing is that when they face reporters after their private conversations, Eisenhower is adamant there should be no criticism, that it is important that we all support our president because foreign policy matters and the president's strength in conducting foreign policy matters, and he did not want this to become a divisive or partisan or political issue. We see this again, even more unlikely, Lyndon Johnson, Dwight Eisenhower. In pajamas. And Johnson would call Eisenhower and say, can you make up some reason why you have to come to Washington so you can sneak over to the White House and talk to me? There were times in the run-up to Vietnam that Johnson turned over meetings to Eisenhower to run as he was trying to figure out the policy. And it became an extraordinary source of comfort to him as he wrestled with this war that ultimately came to be devouring his presidency, to be able to call Eisenhower and just talk things through with him, someone else who understood what the stakes were and how hard the decisions were.
One of the things we heard over and over from the aides to presidents is that when all presidents, regardless of party, come into office, they think three things. One, oh God, I've been set up. Two, you know, who am I going to talk to about this? And three, oh, it's way worse than I thought. This is the picture of three men, presidents in the 1970s. This is on a flight actually to Cairo in 1981 when they were going to the funeral of Anwar Sadat. We put this picture up here because of the friendship that developed. None of these three men, when they went to the funeral, liked each other. On the way home, Carter and Ford become friends, two men who fought bitterly in 1976, bond on the plane back over several things: the need to raise money for the presidential libraries, the need to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives, and their shared dislike of Ronald Reagan. Clubs can be like that, you know. This is one of my favorite pairings in the presidential club, yes. Beauty and the Beast. Most people don't know that these two men had met, much less were late-night phone pals, but it's true. In 1993, when Bill Clinton comes in, all the presidents, the former presidents, there were 5, one of the most in American history, all wanted to help Clinton. They wanted to meet the new guy, but nobody was trying to get Clinton's attention quite like Nixon, who was standing outside the White House practically waving his arms saying, "Call me." Clinton finally agrees to call him. They become late-night phone pals. They talk about China, they talk about Russia, but what Clinton really wants to know from Nixon is, how do you organize your day? You know, how did you do this? And they actually talk about, when did you eat breakfast, and did you have a nap? Did you work late? And Nixon's thrilled by this because he remembers trying to figure it out too, but not having the nerve to ask Eisenhower about it.
You know, of all the